Welcome back to Genetics in the Paddock with Emily. I'm your host, Emily Johnston, and I'll be taking you along on my journey to learn about all things genetics in extensive livestock. Last season, we explored the foundational aspects of genetics. We discussed everything from basic genetic principles to practical applications on farm. This season, we're kicking it up a notch. Today's episode is a little different. I'm joined by Dr. Matt Wolcott from the Animal Genetics and Breeding Unit, as well as Catriona Millen from the Agricultural Business Research Institute. Today we're going to discuss some of the most common misconceptions about BREEDPLAN, the National Genetic Evaluation for beef cattle. This is an episode I can guarantee you'll want to stick around for, and one you'll enjoy. So with that, let's get into it. Misconception 1. I can look at an animal and tell how it's going to perform, i.e. BREEDPLAN isn't needed. So Matt, would you like to start with that one?
For some traits that we want to achieve genetic progress for, it's kind of true. And that's highly heritable traits that we can observe in the individuals we're making selection decisions on. And people have made genetic progress for traits like weight just by observing animals. But once you get to traits which aren't easily observable in your selection candidates, something like female reproduction when you're looking at young bulls, or cow body composition, or mature cow size, we have to rely on recording in the progeny and relatives of animals to allow us to make selection decisions for those traits, in selection candidates. There's also the issue of traits that aren't as highly heritable as some. Days to calving is a good example. It's at the lower end of the heritability range of the traits that we analyse in BREEDPLAN, and it means there's more impact of the environment on the performance of animals that we observe in the paddock, and separating the genetic component from that is a process that requires some analysis, and that's what BREEDPLAN does. It removes, those environmental factors and presents you with the real genetic merit of an animal on the basis of the data that's been collected.
Wonderful. And Catriona, do you have anything you'd like to add on to that?
So I think it's important to realise, even when we're looking at highly heritable traits, while Matt's correct, yes, of course you could see some bulls might look like they're more growthy than others, it's important to remember that when you go to a sale and there's a lineup of bulls, those bulls are not necessarily all the same age. They're not necessarily all from the same property.
Absolutely, yep.
Some might be twin calves raised as twins on mum, while others are raised as singles. So we see those sorts of things in a multi-vendor sale, in a single vendor sale, that can make it hard to look at an animal and know if the differences we're seeing are genetic, environmental, or a combination. And that's why we have BREEDPLAN, to help us, as Matt said, focus in on this is the genetic part, this is the heritable part, this is what it's going to pass on to its progeny.
Perfect. I think that clears that one up very well. So now we've got misconception 2, and Catriona, I might get you to start with this one. So that is, BREEDPLAN figures are the only thing that is important in animal selection.
Yeah, so this is one we hear all the time. There seems to be a misconception out there that BREEDPLAN advocates, or the BREEDPLAN extension and BREEDPLAN staff advocate, that you should just look at figures when you're making bull selection decisions, and that's absolutely not true. BREEDPLAN is a tool that can assist producers in animal selection, but it's not the only tool that should be used. Fertility, so BBSE results, structural soundness, temperament of the bull itself, all of those traits are important. You want a package when you're buying a bull. Genetics is part of that package, but there's a whole range of other traits and other information that you want to help inform your selection decision as well.
Awesome. And Matt, is there anything else you'd like to add on to that?
I definitely agree with Catriona. I'll just make the point that different breeds have different ranges of EBVs available, and some breeds don't have information about structure or temperament in their evaluation, but some do, and those are sources of information that people can use to make selection decisions on traits that, I think often aren't thought of as BREEDPLAN traits. Things like temperament, things like foot and leg structure are present in the evaluation for some breeds, And if other breeds really want them, it's a matter of coming to an agreement on that and doing the recording that's required to get the data we need to kick off those analyses. And that's doable.
So just to add in with what Matt said there, we, as Matt correctly said, some breeds have docility or flight time temperament EBVs, a couple have structural soundness EBVs. BREEDPLAN has the capacity to record those traits on the database even if the breed doesn't have them included in their analysis. And that's what we need to happen. So any breeder that's part of a breed that would like those EBVs in the future, chicken and egg scenario, what came first? For us, we really need that performance data to come on file to be able to generate an EBV.
Great, thanks guys. That was a great discussion. So for number 3, we have BREEDPLAN is an unproven technology and just a fad. And Matt, I might get you to start with that one, if that's okay.
Right. I think that's rubbish. What we've really got at our disposal to help people putting that opinion forward understand is that we can clearly demonstrate, and have been doing for years, that the way we describe the genetic merit of animals translates to their performance in the paddock. So EBVs are an accurate basis for ranking animals' performance relative to each other, assuming all else is equal. And that's a test that we're applying to the information that's coming into BREEDPLAN and on the basis of research information on an ongoing basis. So we're very much keeping an eye on the fact that phenotypes reflect the information in their EBVs. And if we ever start to see that depart from the truth, then we really start looking at the evaluation. And in the past, we have turned traits off because that relationship has started to break down. So we monitor it, we evaluate it on a rolling basis and make sure that it's right. And we are confident that that's the case.
Thank you. And Catriona, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Like Matt, I laugh when I hear that BREEDPLAN's just a fad, because the first BREEDPLAN evaluation was done in 1985. We'll have 40 years worth of BREEDPLAN evaluations next year. And so to me, that doesn't sound like a fad. That's something that's been around for quite a while now. And as Matt said, there are plenty of proof of profit studies that have been done both in Australia and overseas that show that EBVs are predicting progeny performance, predicting phenotype. And to steal from Angus Australia, they have a great tagline on that: EBVs are no bull.
Great, love that. That's definitely worth noting. Thanks, guys. Okay, so misconception 4. So this one is BREEDPLAN data can't be trusted and breeders are cheating the system. So Catriona, I'll let you take it away with this one to start with.
Great question. I think we get that a lot from commercial producers when we're out talking at field days. I think there's a couple of aspects that we can look at there. So firstly, what I would say to a commercial producer is that, to me, trust between yourself as a commercial producer and your seed stock producer is paramount. If you don't trust that they're putting the correct data in for their BREEDPLAN EBVs, do you trust any of the data that you're getting back as a buyer? Are their vaccine records correct? Are their pedigrees correct? That's the first point, that I think that really what's vitally important is good relationship building between seed stock producers and commercial producers. If you wouldn't buy a car off them, maybe don't buy a bull off them. The second point is that it's really very difficult to cheat BREEDPLAN. I have been working at BREEDPLAN for nearly 10 years, and I think I would struggle to cheat the system. We do have checks and balances in place. We expect to see variation in contemporary groups, how animals perform in their mobs. There are a number of checks and balances behind the scene to make sure that the data sets we're getting look robust. And yeah, there are certain things we look for. I think it's very, very difficult for a producer to cheat the system. And really, BREEDPLAN is a tool to help seed stock producers make genetic progress. If they're cheating the system, they're only shooting themselves in the foot.
Those are some great points you've made there, Catriona. And Matt, is there anything else you'd like to add on to that?
Just to get a little bit more technical, there's really two types of inaccuracy that can come in the data we get. The first is around accuracy. Random error. Is there general lack of precision in recording, in which case errors can be up or down, and those sort of errors very much balance themselves out. If your scales aren't weighing quite as precisely as they could be, the assumption is very much that will be handled in the analysis, even though greater precision will always be better. The other type is inaccuracy that biases the data, and it means that it's representing animals who should be in one part of the range, in another part of the range. And that is problematic. And if we ever saw biased data coming in on a large scale level, we would have concerns about the trait. Again, as Catriona said, it's something that is checked. The evidence is that essentially doesn't exist. The few cases where we see it, it's genuine technical problems, and those can be addressed. But the chances that people, as Catriona said, can sit down, make up information that will have the desired effect on the EBVs that are being produced is extremely complex. You need to understand an awful lot about the analysis to be able to actually pull that off. And the vast majority of people don't. They are interested in accurately describing the genetics of the animals that they're making selection decisions on.
And just to add to that, that's a great point that Matt's made. Obviously, as part of the extension team, I work with seed stock producers who query their EBVs, and I would say that the vast majority of queries we get asked, there might be some data structure problems, but that's what the extension team is here for, and we work through with producers, how you can do your data collection better, how things can happen on farm. So I would say I don't see malicious data coming in. I see people with that we need to do some extra work and some further education, and that's the beauty of having the ability to have BREEDPLAN diagnostics done and an extension team that's on the ground to help producers.
Thanks, guys. That's some great discussion around that question, and it's definitely made things very crystal clear. So for the next one we have is low accuracy EBVs aren't worth using, and Matt, I'm going to get you to take it away with this.
The issue of accuracy is really about your attitude to risk. It's how much you're willing to roll the dice that an animal is described accurately. And EBV accuracies tell us how much we expect an animal may change as more data becomes available. And animals with lower accuracy have the possibility that they can change more than animals with higher accuracy. I think it's worth saying in this discussion that on average, the lowly accurate EBVs, as they gain accuracy, remain the same. As you move from a group of animals with lower accuracy to a group of animals with higher accuracy, their average EBVs will remain very much the same. But there is the chances that those animals of lower accuracy can shift more. So it's really about your attitude to risk. And given the fact that in an effective selection program, your most genetically superior animals are going to be your youngest animals, they inevitably will be the animals who have lower accuracy as well. So if you really want to put the foot down on making genetic progress, some of the animals you select will probably be lower accuracy, and you're taking that risk to get greater rates of genetic progress. And that's a decision for individual breeders to make. You can stick with highly accurate animals and accept that on average they're likely to be less of slightly lower genetic merit than some of the real young guns that are available in the current crop of calves.
And is it fair to say that it's probably better to choose an animal with lower accuracy than no EBV at all, so you kind of have some idea of what you're buying?
Absolutely. So, some information is always better than none. And given that we expect, on average again, that lowly accurate animals will remain pretty much where they start. I think you're taking a chance, but it's a calculated risk, where if you have no information, you can't make that calculation of how much risk you're taking.
Great, thanks for that, Matt. Catriona, is there anything you'd like to add on?
Yeah, I completely agree with Matt. Accuracy is about attitudes to risk, and as Matt said, there is more likelihood that a lower EBV accuracy animal will change over time, but as Matt described, the group generally stays where they were. So it's about how you manage risk. Do you go with a highly accurate bull that you know is unlikely to move much in terms of his EBVs? Do you take a team approach where you select a team of young bulls? But also with what Matt just finished on there, I heard a really good analogy at Beef Australia earlier this year that having EBVs gives you some information. If you have a bunch of cans on a shelf in your kitchen and they don't have labels and you pick one, you don't know if you've got tomato soup, beans, corn, etc. But if you've got some information, if there's a label on it, you have a feel for what you're selecting, and I think that's the important thing. EBVs give you some information. Having no EBVs, you're taking a stab in the dark.
Thanks, guys, and I think that's a really, really nice analogy to end up on that question. So our next misconception is BREEDPLAN doesn't work for small herds. And Catriona, I might get you to lead with this one.
Yep. So this is a good question too that we hear quite a bit. So I've heard people say, if you've got X number of animals, BREEDPLAN won't work for you. And I think when you've got a smaller herd, it really depends on how your program's set up and what you're doing. If you're breeding 10 calves a year and each of those calves hits the ground across a 10-month period, so you've got one calf in January, one in February, one in March, BREEDPLAN's really not going to be something in terms of you being able to performance record those calves and get good sized contemporary groups. That's the sort of situation where if someone came to me and said, this is what I'm doing, I'd say, well, look, BREEDPLAN and performance performing isn't going to work for you. And we've had conversations with producers where we say, look, in your particular situation, no, we don't think performance recording is suitable. We're not trying to sell BREEDPLAN to those that it's really not going to work for. But conversely, if you've got 10 calves that are hitting the ground in a 6-week period, we can probably get a decent sized contemporary group in terms of performance recording those animals. So it's not a straight cut, this many animals it will or it won't work. It really depends on what you're doing, how you're doing it. And if you are in a smaller herd situation, I'd say reach out to the BREEDPLAN team and we'll have a chat about how we can, whether or not we can make BREEDPLAN work for your individual circumstances. And the other point that I think is really important is that's about performance recording. Can we make performance recording work in your herd? Even if we can't, there's no reason you can't use BREEDPLAN EBVs in your selection decision. So that's the other thing to consider. There's two levels. Can I performance record? Potentially. Can I use BREEDPLAN information in my selection decisions? Absolutely.
Great, thanks for that. And Matt, is there anything you'd like to put on the back of that one?
Not much, really. I think Catriona summarised it really well. If you want to do effective recording in a small herd, it's going to require a bit of care. But if you talk to us about it, we can absolutely do our best to help. I think one thing worth mentioning is linkage is important in small herds, making sure you're well genetically linked to the rest of the population. You're not operating in a bit of a bubble, but being linked to the rest of the population as well as you can will help you to get benefit from other people's recording, which can be particularly useful in those small breeding programs, and to understand how your contemporary groups are going to be put together, and understanding that will help you do your recording as effectively as possible.
Wonderful. Thanks for clearing that up, guys. And it's always nice to reiterate that there is support for those who might have questions, especially with smaller or difficult contemporary groups. So thank you for that. The next one is genomics will replace the need for performance recording. And Matt, I might get you to start with this one.
Yep. It's a really nice idea. Unfortunately, Certainly at this stage in the beef industry, it is not true. A genomic evaluation is absolutely dependent on the quality and quantity of phenotypes coming in. And there may be base levels which we can operate with for some traits, which means that we can start to look at harvesting the recording that's happening to drive our genetic evaluation. I don't think that's the case for many traits in the evaluation at the moment, and certainly the ones where it matters, which are the traits of high economic importance that tend to be a bit tricky to measure, things like reproduction, carcass traits, feed efficiency, methane as it starts to become more of a element of the landscape we're working in. All of these traits we need to put our foot down as hard as we can to get as many and high quality phenotypes as we can get. And they will drive precision in our evaluation. For traits like weaning weight, I can imagine a time when we say, particularly to smaller herds, and it's relevant to the last question, that as long as you're well linked to the population, the value of your recording weaning weights is probably not that high. But I think right now you'd have to look at your situation specifically to see if that's the case. That's not general advice, and it may be something that could develop as time went on. It also gives us some opportunities around data quality, and the quality of data that is coming into the evaluation is critical. And if genomics allowed us to be a bit more discerning in the data that we were including in the evaluation, that would create some real opportunities to drive precision in the evaluation. Again, this is pie in the sky sort of stuff. It's not relevant at the moment, but as time goes on and as the landscape develops, they're the sorts of things that we can start to think about.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Matt. And Catriona, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just that I agree with Matt. Phenotypes, performance information is vitally important as we move forward with genomics. We need well-formed, well-structured reference populations, and that means that we can't stop phenotyping and just rely on DNA. And one thing I found really interesting, because obviously there's been a lot of discussion about, as we introduce the ability for people to do a DNA test, will we see performance records drop off? One thing I found really interesting is in some of our northern breeds, we've actually seen the opportunity to do DNA tests bring new animals into the analysis that previously weren't being performance recorded, and as a result, some of those breeders have actually started performance recording and collecting phenotypes, and that's certainly not something I was expecting to see. I thought we'd see the opposite direction happen, but it's been very interesting to observe that happen recently.
Thanks for that one, guys. That was a really interesting conception to discuss. So the next one I have is you can't make genetic progress in low heritability traits. And I'm going to give this one to you first, Catriona.
We hear this quite a bit as well, and Matt mentioned earlier that days to calving has been a lowly heritable trait. It's a fertility trait. It's not as highly heritable as traits like growth, for example. But I think you can always make genetic progress in a trait that's heritable, and part of what's important there is not just the heritability of the trait, but how much variation we see in the trait. And this is a trait that has days to calving, is a trait that we see a lot of variation for. So yes, sometimes it takes more records, but variation is a key component there. Traits need to be heritable and have variation in order for us to make genetic progress.
Thanks, Catriona. And Matt, is there anything you'd like to add?
Only to agree with Catriona. Variation is the key. And the real question is, are there differences in the genetics, as described by EBVs, in the animals I'm making selection decisions about? As long as that's the case, it doesn't matter what the heritability is. As long as you can see differences between potential animals you're going to bring into your herd or make a decision about, then those EBVs can be used effectively.
Perfect. I think that's a very crystal clear message. So the next one that I have on my list is curve bender animals don't exist. And Matt, I'll give this one to you.
Excellent. Rubbish again. So the notion of curve benders is animals who buck the trend as far as expectations around how traits vary in common. And the number in the background of that is a genetic correlation, and it describes how two traits vary in common. And there are traits that are quite highly correlated to each other, things like weights across time. 200-day weight is fairly highly genetically correlated with 400-day weight and 600-day weight, and mature cow weight is correlated with birth weight. And the higher those correlations are, the lower the chances that we're going to see animals who buck those trends. And in the case of positive correlations, where we expect things to be going up together, high correlations mean there's less chance that birth weight, for example, will go up while mature cow weight comes down. But those correlations are only averages based on the population that we're observing. It does not mean that animals who are different to that don't exist. And the way to identify those animals is to record the traits in question. And once you do that, then those correlations go out the window. They don't matter anymore. Once we have phenotypes for correlated traits, it is what those phenotypes are that will drive the EBVs of those animals. And the correlations will only come into play in a significant way for animals that don't have both traits recorded, or don't have one or the other, or both. And then the genetic correlations will do their best to help us estimate the genetics of that animal based on the performance of its relatives.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Matt. And Catriona, is there anything else you'd like to pop on the end of that?
No, I think Matt covered that perfectly. The correlations between traits are not absolute, and you need to record both the traits you're interested in order to find curve benders.
And they exist. And we've got good examples of breeds who have driven real deviation from those correlations in their populations. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, guys. That was an interesting one to discuss. And I have one more before this episode finishes up. And this one is, EBVs are for sales and not for breeding. And for this last question, Catriona, I'm going to get you to kick us off.
This one's interesting. Obviously, BREEDPLAN EBVs are available for people to make animal selection decisions. And so we see them used at sale to sell seed stock animals. And I think that's a legitimate use. We want commercial buyers to be making informed decisions on the bulls that they're buying. But they are there as a selection and a breeding tool. They're not there just to sell bulls. They're there to help people make informed decisions so that they can make more informed breeding decisions in their herds.
Wonderful. And Matt, is there anything you'd like to add on to that?
I agree with Catriona. I think, when genetic evaluations were set up, the goal was absolutely to allow them to be used in breeding programs to improve the rates of genetic change for traits that are driving profitability. And that means that they are first and foremost a tool to decide which animals you mate to each other to produce the most profitable offspring. The fact that they are useful in making decisions at a sale is absolutely fine and a sensible use of those numbers. But first and foremost, they are a way to drive genetic progress. And that happens in the seed stock sector and has to be part of decision making by stud breeders.
I think that's a great summary. Thanks so much for that, Matt and Catriona. All right, so that's all of our misconceptions that we have for today. And thank you both so much for spending some time with me to myth bust some of those. It was some very interesting discussion and it was great to hear from both of you. So thanks so much for today. It was really, really insightful.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Genetics in the Paddock with Emily. I hope you found our discussion as enlightening as I did. This episode was produced by the extensive livestock genetics team within the New South Wales Government. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to our podcast on your favourite platform, leaving us a review and sharing it with your friends and colleagues. Your feedback and support help us grow and reach more people who are passionate about livestock genetics. If you have any questions, comments or suggestions for future topics or people you'd like to hear on the show, please feel free to reach out to me on emily.johnston@dpi.newsouthwales.gov.au. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.